ever stayed alone in your workplace after hours and felt like someone was still there? For Daniel, a night security guard at an office complex in Mauritius, that feeling wasn't just paranoia. It became a nightmare he couldn't escape. Every night, he walked the same dimly lit hallways, hearing only the echo of his own footsteps. But soon, he began noticing extra sounds, ones he couldn't explain. At first, it was subtle. Daniel heard faint tapping against the office windows, even though the building's 10th floor made that impossible. Then came the soft, dragging noise along the corridor, as if something heavy was being pulled behind him. He checked every room, but the offices were always empty. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following his rounds. One night, Daniel reached a particular office door he always found locked. Yet that night it was slightly open. When he pushed it wider, the air inside felt colder than the rest of the building. He swore he heard faint whispering from the corner, but when he turned on his flashlight, nothing. Just an empty desk and scattered papers. Before leaving, he shut the door tightly. But as he walked away, he heard the distinct click of it unlocking again behind him. Have you ever had a door open by itself when you were sure it was locked? Around 2 a.m., the elevator, shut down after hours, suddenly came to life. The doors opened on his floor with a long mechanical groan. The panel inside flickered between random floor numbers. Though no one was inside, Daniel stepped closer, uneasy. Just before the doors closed, he caught sight of a shadow in the mirrored panel. A figure standing directly behind him, except when he turned, the hallway was empty. The incidents escalated. Chairs would be rearranged between his patrols. Computer monitors flickered to life with distorted text on the screen. One night, the CCTV system glitched, displaying footage of someone pacing in the hallway outside. Daniel rushed to check, but the corridor was empty. Yet, when he replayed the footage, he saw himself sitting at the security desk, even though he was standing in the hallway at that exact moment. The final night Daniel worked there, the building went silent, too silent. As he passed the same locked office, the door was wide open. Inside, the whispers were louder, layered voices repeating his name. He dropped his flashlight, and the beam revealed something terrifying. An outline of a figure crouched in the corner, motionless but unmistakably human-shaped. Daniel ran. He never returned for his job or his belongings. The office building later closed down 2 floors, citing renovations. But to this day, no tenant stays past 6 p.m. If the story kept you tensed, hit the like button and subscribe for more true horror stories. Would you have stayed another night in that job? Comment your answer. Have you ever taken a job simply because you had no other choice? That's how Fred ended up working night shifts at an abandoned textile factory outside France. The factory had once been a hub of life and industry, but after a fire accident years ago, it was only partially reopened. Most people avoided it, whispering that it carried a curse. Fred didn't care much about rumors. He needed the paycheck. His role was simple: keep watch, ensure that the machinery stayed untouched, and report anything unusual. To him, it sounded straightforward enough. But on his very first night, he realized why no one stayed long in this job. The factory was massive. Endless hallways, silent looms, and abandoned equipment stretched like a maze. The smell of burnt fabric still lingered in some sections, as if the fire had happened yesterday. Fred thought it was his imagination at first, but the deeper he went into the building, the more oppressive the air felt. When his supervisor handed him the keys, he simply said, "Don't go near the weaving room after midnight." That was it. No explanation, no reasoning, just that one warning. The shift began uneventfully. Fred patrolled the main floor, checked the windows, and marked down his logbook. By 1 a.m., the factory was so still he could hear his own heartbeat. That's when the sound began, a faint rhythmic thumping. At first, he thought it was the old pipes, but as he listened closely, the noise resembled something else. The steady pounding of weaving machines. The problem was, all machinery had been shut down years ago. He followed the sound toward the weaving room, the one place his supervisor had told him to avoid. The door was locked with a rusted padlock. Yet, the unmistakable hum of looms working inside seeped through the cracks. He leaned closer, his ear against the wood. That's when he heard it, voices. Dozens of them, low and overlapping, as if workers were speaking to each other while operating machines. The hairs on his arms stood straight, and Fred backed away quickly. When he returned to the main hall, the factory was silent again. He told himself it was fatigue, just his imagination playing tricks. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. By his third night, Fred had convinced himself he was adjusting. The noises hadn't returned, and he stayed away from the weaving room. But unease crept in again when he walked past the wide factory windows. The security lights outside threw faint glows across the walls. As he moved, he noticed shadows flickering, except they weren't his. Multiple shapes moved across the walls, resembling men and women working at looms. Their motions were repetitive, mechanical, as if caught in an endless loop. He rushed outside to check, thinking maybe squatters had broken in. But the yard was empty. Only the whistling wind carried through the open ground. Yet, when he re-entered the building, the shadows remained, still moving, still working. What terrified him most was that one of the figures seemed to stop, turning slowly toward him. Though faceless, he felt it stare, and a chill ran through his body. He shut his eyes for a moment, but when he opened them, the shadows were gone. Have you ever seen something out of the corner of your eye that felt too real to ignore? The fourth night was worse. He had settled into the routine of making notes in his logbook when a faint sound echoed behind him. "Fred!" He froze. His name had been whispered, clear and deliberate. Spinning around, he saw only the long hallway, stretching into darkness. The whisper returned, this time from the other end of the hall. "Fred!" He tried to steady his breathing. Was someone playing a cruel prank? But how would they know his name? And how could the voice move so quickly from one end of the building to another? He grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the machinery. The beam caught something. A pale figure crouched near one of the looms. Its head snapped toward him, though its features were blurred, almost unfinished, like a half-made doll. His hand shook, and the light flickered. When it came back on, the figure was gone. The silence was suffocating. He wrote in his logbook that he saw nothing unusual. But deep down, he knew he was lying, to himself more than anyone else. On his sixth night, Fred's supervisor visited briefly to check in. Unable to hold back, Fred asked, "What happened in the weaving room?" The supervisor paused, his face tightening. He explained that during the fire years ago, most of the workers had been trapped in that room. The old machinery caught flames quickly, and the collapsing beams sealed the doors. Dozens died screaming for help no one could give. Their remains were never fully recovered. Some say they never left, the supervisor admitted. That's why we locked that door. His tone suggested that was all he would say, and he left Fred standing there, shaken to the core. That night, Fred didn't patrol. He stayed in the security office, clutching his flashlight like a lifeline. But around 3 a.m., the weaving machines began again, louder than ever. The vibrations shook the walls, and the whispers turned into cries. Fred didn't wait. He abandoned his post, ran into the night, and never returned. Weeks later, the factory shut down once again. Officially, it was due to structural concerns. But those who had worked there knew the truth. If the story made you uneasy, hit the like button and share it with someone who works night shifts. Would you have lasted longer than Fred? Comment your answer below. Hospitals are unsettling enough during the day. At night, when the lights dim and corridors empty, they become something else entirely. For Rosaline, a newly hired nurse, her first night shift at St. Bartholomew's Hospital felt more like a test of courage than a job. On her second week, she was assigned to deliver supplies to the old basement storage room. Most staff avoided it, saying the place was outdated, damp, and unnecessary since newer storerooms had been built. But because Rosaline was new, she didn't argue. She carried the supplies, trying to ignore the way her co-workers exchanged uneasy glances when her assignment was announced. The basement was reached through a heavy metal door at the end of a service corridor. The elevator leading down rattled like it hadn't been used in years. The walls were chipped, stained, and carried a smell of mildew that clung to her uniform. As she reached the basement, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint dripping of water somewhere in the dark. Have you ever been asked to go somewhere in your workplace that everyone else avoided? Did you go? The shelves stretched endlessly, filled with outdated medical equipment, broken stretchers, and dusty crates. Rosaline set the supplies on a table and prepared to leave, but something caught her ear. A soft sound, like wheels rolling across the floor. Her flashlight beam cut through the dust-filled air. At the far end of the corridor, she saw the faint outline of a gurney slowly moving by itself. It rolled past one aisle and vanished into another, as if someone was pushing it. But when she hurried to check, the corridor was empty. The wheels had left no mark on the dusty floor. Her heart pounded. She reminded herself of what her supervisor had said. Old places creak. Things shift. It's all normal. Yet, the gurney's movement had been deliberate, controlled, not random. When she turned back toward the elevator, something else unsettled her. The supplies she had placed on the table were now scattered across the floor. She hadn't heard them fall. They had simply been moved. She left the basement quickly, telling herself it was fatigue. But that night she couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the squeak of gurney wheels in her mind. On her next shift, Rosaline tried to avoid the basement. But as luck would have it, she was once again asked to retrieve supplies. This time, she braced herself, determined not to let her imagination get the better of her. The moment she stepped in, she noticed the air was colder than before. She gathered the items quickly, but then froze as she heard voices, low, muffled, as though a group of people were speaking behind the walls. She moved closer, straining to listen. At first, the voices were indistinct, like murmurs. Then one became clearer. It was a woman, whispering her name, Rosaline. She dropped the supplies and backed away. The voices rose, overlapping, pressing into her ears like a crowd surrounding her. She fled to the elevator, hammering the button until the doors closed. As it rose, she could still hear the whispers echoing, fading only when she reached the main floor. Later, she asked a senior nurse if anyone had ever heard strange sounds in the basement. The woman's face tightened. "Don't go down there alone," she warned. That was all she said. Curiosity gnawed at Rosaline. On her next shift, she decided to investigate more carefully. She took her flashlight and went deeper into the basement, past the shelves and broken equipment. That's when she found it, a steel door at the very end of the corridor. Unlike the others, it was locked shut with a chain and padlock. Something about it unsettled her immediately. The door had small vents at the top, and from behind them came a faint sound, labored breathing. She pressed her ear against it, and for a moment, she was certain she heard someone whispering prayers in Igbo. Her flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment, a shadow passed across the vent from the inside, as if someone was standing just behind the door. She stumbled back, the beam of light jerking across the walls. When she shone it again, the vents were empty, and the sounds had stopped. She wanted to report it, but she already knew what her supervisors would say. They would dismiss it, tell her it was stress. Yet the image of that moving shadow haunted her long after she left the basement. By now, Rosaline's unease was visible. Other nurses noticed her pale expression, her reluctance to do basement runs. Finally, one of the older doctors pulled her aside. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked quietly. He explained that years ago, during a cholera outbreak, the hospital basement had been used as an overflow ward. When patients died, their bodies were kept in the locked room before burial. At the height of the crisis, the staff couldn't keep up. Dozens of bodies were left there unattended for weeks. Some believed their souls never moved on. "Don't stay down there longer than you need to," the doctor warned. "And if you hear your name, never answer." That night, when Rosaline returned to the basement one last time, she forced herself to stay calm. But the moment she reached the locked room, her flashlight went out. In the pitch black, she heard it again, her name, whispered from every direction at once. She ran without looking back, abandoning the supplies. That was her final shift. She resigned the next morning, unwilling to risk another encounter. If this story kept you tense, make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend who believes hospitals are safe at night. Would you have gone back after hearing your name whispered? Comment below. Most people imagine call centers as noisy, crowded rooms filled with chatter and ringing phones. But after midnight, everything changes. The building grows quiet, and only a handful of staff remain. For George, a night shift supervisor at a call center in London, that silence soon became unbearable. The call center occupied the top 2 floors of a converted office building. By day, it was bright and bustling. At night, Only a skeleton crew handled international clients. The rest of the building was empty. On his first week, George noticed that his crew seemed uneasy. They stuck close together, avoided the break room on the lower floor, and never used the last cubicles near the emergency exit. Whenever he asked why, they would just shrug and say, "You'll see." He brushed it off as office gossip. After all, late-night shifts already carried an air of discomfort. But soon, he realized they weren't exaggerating. Have you ever worked in a building that felt completely different at night? It began with the phones. Around 2:30 a.m., a line lit up with an incoming call. George answered, expecting a client's voice. Instead, there was silence, then faint static. Before he could disconnect, a whisper seeped through, "Help us." He checked the system records. The call had no origin, no number, no log, nothing. He thought it was a glitch, but minutes later another phone rang. This time, one of his agents answered, only to slam the receiver down with a pale face. "Someone was crying on the line," she muttered. The calls continued over the next nights, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always filled with faint voices, sobs, or desperate whispers. The IT team confirmed there was no trace of them in the call logs. Officially, those calls had never existed. The team grew paranoid, jumping whenever a phone rang. Some refused to answer altogether. George tried to maintain order, but even he couldn't ignore the icy dread that crawled over him whenever the phones lit up. One night, George went downstairs to fetch coffee from the break room. The fluorescent light inside flickered as he stepped in, buzzing unnaturally loud. On the far table sat a half-full cup of coffee, still steaming. No one had been downstairs for hours. The only staff were upstairs with him. Confused, he turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the frame. The room plunged into darkness. He groped for the switch, heart pounding. That's when he heard breathing, deep, ragged breaths just behind him. He spun around, flashlight from his phone cutting through the dark. No one was there. The coffee cup, however, had been tipped over, the hot liquid dripping slowly onto the floor. When he finally forced the door open, the hallway outside was silent. Yet, when he looked back, the lights in the break room were on again, glowing steadily, as if nothing had happened. Determined to prove to himself it was all imagination, George decided to patrol the floor himself. He walked past row after row of cubicles, the blue glow of computer screens casting eerie shadows. As he passed the last row, the one his staff avoided, he noticed something odd. A monitor flickered to life, though no one was logged in. On the screen appeared a chat window filled with a single phrase repeating endlessly, "We are still here." His skin prickled. He checked the chair, empty. Yet, in the reflection of the monitor, a figure sat hunched over the keyboard, typing furiously. He spun around, but the chair remained vacant. Only the reflection had shown otherwise. From that night on, the last cubicles stayed abandoned. Even George avoided them, too shaken to linger there longer than necessary. On his final week, the activity reached a climax. At exactly 2:45 a.m., every phone on the floor began ringing at once. The shrill chorus filled the air, drowning out everything else. His team froze, terrified, no one daring to pick up. Against his better judgment, George grabbed the nearest receiver. For a moment there was silence. Then dozens of voices erupted simultaneously, pleading, crying, whispering his name. Over the noise, one voice stood out, calm and clear. "Get out!" The lights flickered. Computer screens displayed distorted faces, mouths open in silent screams. Chairs shifted as if invisible agents were sitting down. The temperature dropped so sharply that George could see his breath. He dropped the phone, shouted for his staff, and they all fled down the stairwell together. By morning, most of them resigned, refusing to return. The company later shut down the night shift entirely, citing low productivity. But those who were there that night knew the truth. The call center had answered one too many calls from the other side. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button and subscribe for more. Could you stay calm if every phone around you started ringing at once? Tell me in the comments.